So, folks, EU5. What a game, eh? That I don't like. Now, before I start tearing into this game, I hope some of you watching this have also seen my previous video, the first look at EU5. Because in that video, I go over what I like and dislike in video games, what my preferences are, stuff like that. So, very briefly, I like RPGs, I like real-time strategy games, turn-based strategy games, slightly less so, and also I'm a historian, so yeah, I love history. So you'd think I would be fascinated by EU5, and indeed at first I was, but I played it for just shy of 100 hours, and it's clearly not a game for me. Now, in my previous video I did say that I will give EU5 a shot, play through it to the end, but yeah, I couldn't do it. Now, like I said in my previous video as well, I have a feeling that a lot of people don't know how to engage with reviews. And that's the point of me mentioning what I like, what my biases are. So, for example, EU4 has to be my most played strategy game, and in fact, it's one of my most played games in general. So you can imagine that what I was looking for in EU5 is not necessarily more of the same, but not much different than EU4. And so I'm saying all of this because I feel like a lot of, at least YouTube reviewers, if not reviewers in general, will review a game based not on what they actually think about the game, but what their audience wants them to say about said game. I don't know if it's the same for movie and book reviews, I don't follow those pretty much at all. But with video games, I can't say that definitively, but I do have a strong hunch that that is what's going on. Because fans of a certain video game, it seems to me like those fans just want to hear their own opinion of the game reflected in that reviewer. But that's not an issue for me, as A, I don't really have much of an audience, at least not yet, and B, like the late great Christopher Hitchens said, my own opinion is enough for me, and I claim the right to have it defended against any consensus, any majority, anywhere, any place, any time.
And anyone who disagrees with this can pick a number, get online, and kiss my ass.
Alright, so basically, this still isn't a review, for all its faults, at least in my mind. This game still is massive. I haven't seen that much of it, but I have seen enough that I know I don't want to keep playing. But again, if I complain about something that you know you like in a game, then that's fine. Just don't take it as a criticism of the game, even though I am presenting it as such. For example, generally speaking, I don't like playing with vassals in these games, because I just like map painting. But you really have to play with vassals, at least at the beginning of the game, due to how just the control system works and how many rebellions you'll be facing if you don't give newly conquered land to vassals at first. And yes, in this game your vassals will have a similar color to your country's color. However, to me, map painting is more than just the literal painting of the map. To me, name placement is almost as important, if not equally important, than painting the map a certain color. And with vassals, your name placement on the map is just not going to look nearly as satisfying. But whatever, I'm pretty sure you have to play with vassals really only at the beginning of the game. That's not really such a big deal. And on that note, like I said, I played just shy of 100 hours of this game, and I got to the year 1550 or 60, something like that. So yeah, the game takes much longer than a game took in EU4, which to me is actually a good thing. I like longer lasting games, but the point of this is just to say that, yeah, I didn't really get to the late/end game. Oh, also, because of stuff I had to do in real life, this video is coming out a bit late. Last time I played this game was at the end of November, so some of the things I'm talking about here may already be outdated, just because Paradox has been pumping out updates really quickly for this game. And obviously, if you're watching this video sometime in the distant future for whatever reason, then probably everything I'm talking about here is going to be irrelevant. But hey, if you're watching this from 2030 or even later, hello, and I'm glad civilization hasn't collapsed yet. Alright, so why do I not like this fucking game? Well, for starters, there's a lot of minor issues, but that's whatever. Like I said also in my first video on this, I'm sure this will all get changed sooner rather than later, or maybe it already has. But for example, the AI can be tricked into declaring war on you by you lowering your estate loyalty to below 25%, at which point that estate will no longer provide levies for you, so you appear weak, and then you quickly raise the estate loyalty back up after somebody has declared war on you. You get those levies and you can crush them. I don't even know if that's really an issue. Like, it's not a bug or whatever, it's just a feature of how estates and estate loyalty works. Then there's bankruptcies. Declaring a bankruptcy doesn't offer you new loans, which might be realistic, but this is just a shitty mechanic, because then you'll just be falling into deeper and deeper loans. However, since that happened to me, they have already fixed that. Now your estates, which are the ones that actually offer you money in this game, don't just go broke in like 50 years of game time. And then there's still issues with the UI and just the game being unclear or maybe even deliberately obtuse. Like, look at this shit, for example. What the fuck is this? Why is Lincoln starving? It clearly says that there's food in the province, and I'm pretty sure also in the region itself. Then I noticed the average literacy in my country was constantly dropping for some reason. I don't know why. You'd think it would be after conquering new land, but no. I think it had something to do with revolts. As I'll get into later, I constantly had to deal with nobles rebelling, so maybe because I was killing off my educated population, the literacy rating was dropping. Again, this isn't really a criticism, just something I wish the game was more clear about, but whatever. Maybe I just wasn't really paying attention. Maybe it did drop after I conquered new land, although even then, I was mostly conquering northern and western France, so I doubt that the literacy rate in those lands would be lower than in England, but whatever. Then I also didn't notice any notifications for when a country leaves a coalition against you. I think there's only a notification when the whole coalition outright disbands. That is to say, only when the last member leaves it. Then there's the events cost scaling. Oh my god. People have been posting about this for a while now. I wonder if by now they have already changed the cost scaling, but one example I had was I had to pay over 1,000 for a university, and this is fairly early on in the game, when that was still a lot of money for me, and universities normally go for about 300. I did select to build it mostly because I expected that maybe more events will follow from it, but otherwise it seems like these kinds of events aren't worth it. And then this one is a bit of a bigger issue now. Vassals' loyalty depends on their raised army. So if you don't raise levies during a war, but they do, their disloyalty will spike. Oh, Jesus fucking Christ, that's so annoying. I had many wars where I figured I'd just let my vassals take care of it, but because I didn't participate in the war, I didn't raise my levies, those vassals got all uppity and wouldn't fight the war for me just because of that. But again, whatever, even this isn't such a big deal. Assuming that this hasn't been changed yet, and even if it never gets changed, just raise your levies and let your vassals do the fighting for you in these situations. Not really a big deal. What is a big deal, however, is my ruler would randomly stop leading armies even though I had the ruler must lead armies law enacted. What the fuck? I truly hope this has already been fixed, but I think this had something to do with me having a couple of personal unions at that point in the game. And what I suspect has been happening is my ruler jumping across from country to country in the Union to do different things. So he would only lead the armies from my country, England, for a few days, and then jumping off into Castile to do whatever, moving on to Austria to, again, do whatever, take a dump or whatever, and then go back to England when I could assign him back to his army for, I don't know, 3 days, maybe a week, and then he'd move back on to Castile. Now, this brings me to my first big issue with this game, and that's personal unions. But before I get into that, I just want to follow up on what I said in my previous video, that indeed, as I suspected even then, crown power is incredibly important, so the game does indeed want, or at least supports you in becoming an absolutist state. And that is actually a good thing. I do like that idea. I just don't think it's been executed particularly well. But okay, personal unions. It seems like it's much easier to get personal unions in this game, and to me that seems like it's clearly been inspired from Crusader Kings, because you get claim on a throne much easier than you did in EU4. For example, I somehow managed to get a Habsburg on my throne, and then I could instantly declare war for the throne of Austria as well. But oh my god, do not do that. At least not if Austria is also the Holy Roman Emperor, because they get a massive bonus to their great power score, which in turn means that they can then easily take over the seniority in your union, which is one of those no fun allowed mechanics in this game. Holy fucking shit, I lost so much patience with this game, dealing with this shit. However, not from Austria. England gets an event early on in the game to get Castile in their personal union, which obviously I took the opportunity. Why wouldn't I? I figured, hey, Castile, pretty big country, can't hurt to have them in my union. But I didn't realize that their great power score is bigger than mine, and even if I did know that at the time, I didn't know that that means they can take over the seniority of a personal union. And so I went to war with them, I got them in my union, and then I was immediately hit with the warning that my seniority in the union is threatened, which is just absolutely fucking fun. Who doesn't want to get involved in what I believe was like a 5 or 6 year long war, only to basically have no benefit from it? Okay, it's still a personal union. Every member in the union is sworn to join defensive wars, I'm pretty sure, but outside of that, nothing is guaranteed. You have to pass laws to enforce everybody to join offensive wars. Your union members can leave due to different succession laws, which is something you can sort of fight against, but a lot of countries have so-called locked succession laws, which, from what I've seen, cannot be changed, which is just fucking fantastic as well. You can fight a war and then you can't do anything to keep the union member inside your union. How the fuck does that make any sense? And how is that fun? Paradox, explain. And then after I lost the seniorship of the union, the AI would constantly, and I mean constantly, I think as soon as it could, which I believe is every year, obviously in-game year, they would initiate votes for changing these union laws. And it's outside of just how annoying it is to constantly have to deal with this micromanagement. If you ignore it and the law gets changed, basically if you ignore it, you're voting to keep the law as it is. But if it gets changed, your estates will lose 15% loyalty, which only leads into you having to deal with rebellions over and over and over again. I really hope they change this, because holy shit, this was probably the main reason why I lost any interest in this game. Oh, by that I don't mean just having to deal with these votes for changing union laws. I mean dealing with personal unions in general. In EU4, whenever you got someone in your personal union, it felt amazing. Here, it feels like you just wasted your time. You're much better off just conquering the land, and if you feel like that land is going to be useless under you directly, which it's going to be probably for the majority of the game regardless, you just create vassals out of it. Like, that's just much better. You have more use out of that land if it's under vassals than under your personal union. Because vassals are forced to help you in defensive and offensive wars, and they actually pay you taxes or tribute or whatever. Not to mention integration speed. Again, I want to paint the map with my color. Personal union members don't even change their color. But regardless, even if they did, I would still want my name all across the map. And integrating personal union members takes way too long. I know there's a bunch of factors that go into the speed of integration. The biggest one, presumably, is your, what do they call it? Cultural influence, right? Yeah, it's cultural influence compared to the target country's cultural tradition. After I got Castile in my personal union, which I believe was, well, it must have been around the year 1400. I'm not really sure, it doesn't matter. It was very early on in the game. If I had started integrating them at that point, the integration, according to the game, would have been done by the year 2200. The most I managed to get that number down was to the year 1836. So basically, right at the end of the game, I would have it integrated. I'm sure there's a couple more modifiers I could get through technology and maybe, increasing my cultural influence. But it still just feels like there's no point. Again, it's just better to give the land to a couple different vessels, and then you integrate those vessels individually, and it'll be done much faster, and you'll have much more use out of that land. So, again, what's the point of personal unions? Outside of role-playing reasons. So like I mentioned earlier, this game, for the most part, just felt like a rebel beating simulator. A big reason for that is what I just mentioned with personal unions. I stopped paying attention to what union law the AI wants to pass, and so my estate loyalty was constantly low and nobles were constantly rebelling. And this brings me to my second big issue with this godforsaken game. Okay, fine, so I lost the seniority in the union. Not really a big issue, since there was no threat of me ever getting integrated by Castile or Austria or anyone. And ultimately, I could pay more attention and pass the laws that the AI wanted to pass as well. However, aside from that, it seems like this game constantly throws events at you that reduces the estate loyalty as well. So what the fuck am I supposed to do if I can't revoke the estate privileges after they revolt? They, that is to say, the estates, keep their power after they lose the revolt. I tried increasing my crown power by any means possible, and I did get it up to about 35% by mid-game, and I believe England starts with about 10, if not even slightly below 10%. But the nobles' power dropped from 55 to just about 45%. So and that's still too high for me to revoke any of their privileges. And they kept rebelling throughout my entire country constantly, which just isn't fun, for fuck's sake. That's why I'm saying, or asking, if Paradox forgot to program fun into this game. Like, let me remind you, this isn't Crusader Kings 2 or 3, where I can just capture the enemy war leader and actually punish the rebels by revoking their titles. If you want to include Crusader Kings bullshit rebellions in this game, also remember to reward the player for beating the snot out of them, please. Just as a quick aside, since I mentioned I raised my crown power up to about 35%, when I got it to about 20% in like 100 years of game time, there was a period there of about 50 years when the game really started clicking for me, because raising this crown power suddenly greatly increased my income, and it started to feel like I am starting to gain control of my country. But unfortunately, that didn't last. Mostly exactly because of what I just said. I still wasn't able to revoke any noble privilege. I could revoke privileges from other estates, but they weren't powerful anyway. They didn't give me any problems. It's just the nobles that, at least in England, are so ridiculously powerful, and seemingly there's nothing you can do about it. And then there's all the issues with building your nation, playing tall, managing trade, that sort of stuff. Okay, first of all, taxes. It seems to me like taxes should just be automated for the most part. The only exception to that rule that I can think of is when you have very high relations with a certain estate, presumably right after they revolt, because yes, at least after an estate revolts, they do get a massive loyalty bump, so at least there's that. But anyway, after an estate revolts, you can raise taxes on that estate just so that you bleed them extra hard until their loyalty drops down to about 50% to get some quick money. Point being, taxes aren't nearly as deep as they were in Victoria 2, where how much you taxed a certain class would affect how much spending money that class has, and there, if a pop didn't have enough money to be of a certain class, they would get demoted. There's nothing like that in EU5. Now, how much you actually can tax a particular estate depends on certain factors, primarily on various privileges that you have given that particular estate. But because you want to keep your estates at least at 50% loyalty, there's really not much that you can micromanage with taxes. So there is an automate taxes button, and like I said, there's basically no reason to ever turn that automation off. Yes, I'm sure there's more exceptions to that rule than the one that I came up with, but I'm also sure that those exceptions are very few. And this leads me to the biggest issue with this game, because this superficial complexity, from what I've seen, applies to the whole economic aspect of this game. With trade, for example, when you first look at it, it may seem complex, daunting, deep, but ultimately, again, you should just have it automated. The only reason I've heard why you might want to micromanage it, at least occasionally, is to speed up your institution spread. But outside of that, just automate it. It's going to give you best trades, and I tried micromanaging it for a little bit, but the trades that I was setting up would constantly stop being profitable after just a few in-game days, maybe weeks. So I couldn't be bothered. I figured the automation just does the best trades possible, that is to say, the most profitable trades. So I couldn't be bothered. I had it all automated, and that was it. So again, what looks to be very in-depth, just judging by the UI and looking at all the different goods and products, you can't really engage with it. Or rather, yeah, you can engage with it, but there's very little reason for you to do so, because it's just better to have it automated. And again, same goes for constructing buildings in your provinces. Again, when you first look at the menu, you see all these different buildings that you can construct, and then as you progress through the ages, you unlock new technologies, and with them you unlock new buildings. The list of things that you can construct grows larger and larger, and you may think, wow, this is something that I can really dig into. But again, there's no reason to do it. Basically, you should build all the buildings that increase your crown power, that increase your cultural tradition and influence, and that provide literacy. Outside of that, just build whatever the UI tells you is going to be the most profitable. Because if you don't, let me tell you what happened to me. I tried to be clever. I figured, okay, I'm going to start making a firearms industry sort of ahead of time. Basically, as soon as I could start building gun manufacturers, I did so. The problem is, in EU5, buildings have upkeep, and since early on in the game, as you would expect, there's very little demand for firearms, I was just bleeding money. And I continued bleeding money until I gave up on my project, if you want to call it that, and just started building whatever was the most profitable manufacturer in a particular province. So, aside from all of that, you should also always build marketplaces and any buildings that provide you with trade capacity, and then just build whichever manufacturer is the most profitable, and that's it. And I know there's also a automate building toggle, which I didn't use, but I would imagine the AI does some sort of similar calculation to what I just suggested. But I didn't want to automate the building process simply because I wanted to at least have something to do during my downtime. That is to say, during the time when I wasn't involved in a war, or more likely, a goddamn rebellion. On that note, it seems like this game very much encourages players to just go to war without any casus belli. Even though that limits how much you can conquer, especially compared to some other CBs, you should, from what I've seen, still do it, just because it's really difficult to get CBs otherwise, at least from my experience. Again, maybe that changes even later on in the game, but from what I've seen, the most reliable CB you can get is through the Parliament, and you can only get that once every 5 years. And this sucks so much, because clearly Paradox wants you to play tall in this game, much more so than in EU4. And I personally, generally speaking, prefer playing tall, but at least to me it's just not fun at all. Everything that you would expect you would manage, or have to manage, while playing tall, managing an empire, or any country for that matter, is either mind-numbingly obvious or should just be automated. So, what is there for me left to do? And I can't go to war because I don't have any CBs. Well, unless you declare a war without a CB, but then you have to take a stability hit, which, at least in the early game, you might not be able to afford, since you can't be throwing a huge amount of money into increasing your stability. But again, that's just the early to mid-game. Okay, granted, like I explained, I sort of gutted myself by trying to be clever and building a firearms industry way ahead of time. So maybe by the 1500s, 1550s, you should have enough money to just max out all of the sliders. But that wasn't my experience. And that's not really the main issue why I'm not having fun with this game. My main issue, or the main reason why I don't have fun with this game, is that the game just constantly throws stuff at you, and once you get over that, there's no reward. Think about in EU4 how the Ottomans would have to go through their decadence crisis eventually. It's a tough crisis, And there's an easy way of getting through it and a hard way. But even if you go through it the easy way, you're still rewarded for it. If you go through it the hard way, you get even better bonuses. And yeah, if you can't get over it, well then you'll probably have to restart your game. Here in EU5, it feels like the game is just throwing crises at you, and once you get over it, there's no reward for it. What? I thought this is like basic psychology. What do you mean? I effectively just fought a boss fight and there's no reward for it. Okay, then I'm not gonna play your game. Okay, getting through these disasters or situations, or whatever they're calling them in EU5. This is a bit of a macro example, but the same issue applies on a micro level as well.
Okay, so I don't particularly like talking about what is fun and what isn't fun, because ultimately, let's be honest, that's all a bit of a subjective thing anyway. A lot of the things that I've complained about in this review, a lot of you might not even think is a bad thing, like I kept mentioning, and some of you might think that those are good things, you would find fun in them. But especially with the latest issue that I mentioned, with regards to getting over crises and not being properly rewarded for doing so, that, I think, is particularly unenjoyable. It's fine if you do it once in a while, but doing it for pretty much every disaster, every situation, or whatever they call it in this game, is bad. Because like I said, if you keep doing that, I just won't play the game. Now, what is fun? What does make a game fun? Well, obviously you could talk about stuff like getting a dopamine hit from constantly being bombarded by rewards, which is something that games like, gacha games or Diablo style games do, ARPGs, stuff like that, by constantly giving you loot. For me, that also isn't particularly fun, and I imagine, given by the online sentiment, a lot of people don't want gacha mechanics in their games. Okay, a big part of that might be because they're also predatory, let's be honest. Now, I think that what EU4 did is fundamentally different from what these gacha games do, in the sense that what I'm going to describe now is more of a slow burn, whereas what gacha games and ARPGs do is more of a just hitting you with big rewards every few minutes. Contrary to that, in EU4, you would basically always slowly become stronger. Basically, obviously, if you lose a war, if you lose land, you become weaker, at least for a little while. And that little while might even translate into you ultimately losing the game, because your neighbors will start power creeping faster than you would, had you not lost that land. But outside of losing a war, losing land, you are basically always getting stronger in EU4. You build a temple, your income increases. You build a workshop, your income increases, thanks to increased production, increased trade, all of that. You conquer new land, obviously, your power increases. But furthermore, if you make states out of those newly conquered provinces, you will also slowly, constantly become more powerful as the local autonomy in those newly cored states drops. Compared with what happens in EU5, because of the blasted control system, okay, if you conquer new land, yes, you will get stronger, at least a little bit. You can build a, what's it called? Is it a temple as well? I think it's a temple in EU5 as well that gives you 5% control. And there is, I think, minimum 10% control in provinces anyway. So with temple, that's 15% control, so you do get a little bit of it, but it caps off fairly quickly. And here lies the main issue. Like I said, in EU5, you are supposed to have vassals for the majority of the game. Clearly, that's what the game wants you to do. That's how you should play in early to mid game. I think even all the way up to late game. So, you have lots of vassals, which in EU4 is great. In EU4 you actually can either have vassals or no. If you have vassals, especially in early game, that's great. They help you a lot, but it's not mandatory. And in EU4, once you integrate them, you pretty much instantly gain a huge dopamine boost, because for the most part, all of their power is now absorbed directly into your country. And it stays that way. You might have to deal with some rebels later down the line, but for the most part, that's how it is. Compare that with EU5. In EU5, you pretty much have to have those vassals, otherwise you're gonna suffer severe economic issues from low control. You won't be able to score as fast as you would with the help of vassals, which by the way is another thing that vassals help with in EU4 as well, but here it's even more noticeable from what I've seen. And then in EU5, what happens? After you integrate your vassals, the provinces which you have integrated will have at first high control, because they had high control under your vassal. But then that control will start dropping. So it feels extra bad when you integrate your vassals, even though for someone like me, having that map painted in that singular color with your name splashed all over it should feel great. But it doesn't, because now you will slowly start becoming weaker and weaker as the control in those provinces starts dropping. Why? You're not rewarded for getting over huge disasters, and you're forced to play with vassals in a map painting game. Look, I know why Paradox did this. It's clear they wanted to slow down the rate of expansion by a lot compared to EU4. Even in Crusader Kings 3 you can see how they quite literally locked primogeniture behind, I think it's even late Middle Ages, whereas in CK2, under certain conditions, you could get it, I think, even before the year 1000, so clearly their design philosophy has changed by a lot. And I realize, to some people, that sounds incredibly fun, because you prefer the simulation aspect of these games rather than the gameplay aspect. So, I might give this game another shot after a year or two, but for now, I think I'm done with it. Now look, like I said at the very beginning, this still isn't a proper review. I don't want to give this game a numbered score or anything. To be fair, I wouldn't want to do that even if this were a proper review. This is more of me wanting to explain that if you wanted an EU4-2 kind of game, this isn't it. I know a lot of people wanted a more proper sequel to EU3, which apparently this is. And yeah, go for it. However, if you're a huge fan of EU4, I cannot recommend this game, sadly. To be fair as well, I didn't get to the very end of the game, but to be honest, I don't think that would change much. Like, let's say that even if the last 100, maybe even 150 years of the game were good, that's still the vast majority of the game that I would have to struggle to get through to the good part. And I'm not interested in doing that. So like I said, to me it feels like this game constantly punishes the player for doing pretty much anything. You can get punished for getting personal unions, and getting personal unions isn't particularly useful in the first place. You get punished for integrating vassals. You don't exactly get punished for building buildings, although there is the opportunity cost. So that is, you are supposed to just build the stuff that will give you money instantly. So you're not particularly encouraged to experiment with different buildings, different industries either. So yeah, I don't know what kind of a gamer this game appeals to, but clearly there are a lot of people that enjoy it. So yeah, like I said, if you enjoy it, good for you. It's not for me. If you want a sequel to EU4, that's not it. But for all the faults that I have brought up here, if you truly feel like you would enjoy it after watching other people play it, or even after watching my review, I would say try it. Unfortunately, there's no demo for it. You can get a feel for it after just 2 hours of playing, so maybe wait for a steep discount on it before getting it, if you're unsure whether or not you'll play it long term. Alright, I think that's it. I think I said everything I wanted to say about this game. So, thanks for watching. Bye for now.